So it looks like RFK decided to suspend his campaign. Looks like those defenders of democracy managed to win out in the end after kicking him off of ballots and keeping him out of debates. First of all, hats off to RFK for at least trying to run a third-party candidacy, because at this point, we just have the duopoly of the Republicans and Democrats, and he was very brave to try to take that on. So even though I don't agree with RFK on a lot of things, I fully supported the idea of him being able to campaign and at least try to become president. And with all the shenanigans that's gone on in this election cycle, the people who seem to be the biggest full-throated preachers of being the defenders of democracy have done everything they could to get RFK kicked off of ballots, everything they could to try to get Donald Trump kicked off of ballots. And we can't excuse Donald Trump for this. He had a hand in this as well. Even though RFK endorsed Donald Trump did not want him in the debate with him and Joe Biden. And imagine what kind of reality we'd be living in right now if RFK was on stage that night, because you would see Joe Biden melt, Trump being Trump, and then we'd have the reasonable sounding person, RFK, up there making his case. And the problem with RFK even running, the most successful third-party candidate to ever run was Ross Perot. He didn't get a single electoral college vote. And there's still this idea out there, if Trump or Harris can't get the 270 electoral college votes, what happens then? It gets thrown to the House of Representatives. And you saw how long it took these jokers to elect a speaker. Imagine if they decide who would be president. Maybe it would just be handed to Trump. I don't know. First thing I really admired about his speech, he actually thanked his supporters and said, "Thank you for everyone who went out there and tried to get his name on ballots and tried to get signatures and all these things." And the Democrats did everything they could to try to invalidate his candidacy by dragging his ass to court and saying that these signatures somehow aren't legitimate. He was recently kicked off the ballot in New York along with Jill Stein. Defenders of democracy, please. And he went on, if he actually ran back when his uncle ran, this was more of an open system then, and he might have actually had a shot. That's not the system we live in today. We have an oligarchy run by the Republicans and Democrats, so those are only our two choices. And they want to keep fear-mongering about the other candidate and saying they're going to end democracy or this person's a communist, which is a joke when Kamala Harris says we're the heirs to the greatest democracy on earth. But somehow in America, we can only manage the choices of Coke and Pepsi. I have seen a lot of online interviews of RFK because mainstream outlets don't ever want him on. He's not a legitimate candidate. Seems like the most powerful people in charge just decide who's legitimate and who's not legitimate. He actually changed my views a little bit on Israel and Palestine. Also, whatever you think of his public health record, it's always weird people bring up his views and saying that he's a little crazy. They'll bring these things up at the end of the interview and then he starts demonstrating that he knows a lot more about it than they do. They're like, well, we gotta end the segment. Get off it. Get off it. Here's what's stupid. I think that the powers that be hate Donald Trump so much they're going to destroy democracy in order to save it. And they promise they won't do any of this shenanigans in the future. I won't hold my breath. And then RFK really started to cook by going after some of the media personnel who were there saying, you guys are just mouthpieces for the government. And then he went on, how did Kamala Harris managed to not do an interview or anything that's unscripted this long, and she's running to be president of the United States. Whereas he's gone on multiple interviews and tried everything he could to get on mainstream media, and he had 2 live interviews. Corporate press is pathetic, and deep down inside, they know they're prostitutes. They just have that cushy job, and they know that I don't actually speak truth to power. I would never do anything like this. Whereas whistleblowers who actually tell us the truth had to flee for their lives. And then he went on about the Russian-Ukraine war and went on how the West actually actively killed peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Boris Johnson famously got them to walk away from a deal. So the Ukrainian and Russian children had to suffer because the most powerful people in the world want to have a pissing contest. And then he went on, the reason he suspended his campaign and decided to support Trump is Trump has actively told him, I want you in my cabinet. Because you can genuinely tell that he actually cares about public health. And he's bringing up the concerns of the processed food we eat and the chronic illness epidemic that's in the United States. And this makes me think when my grandparents told me saying, you're going to live a lot longer than us. My grandparents lived until their 90s. Life expectancy is going down in the United States. And the reason I think my grandparents lived to their 90s is because they actually ate real food when they were growing up. versus the processed crap we're eating now. Are we going to get to one day where we're like living to our like 60s and that's going to be the new life expectancy of the United States? Not for the rich like Henry Kissinger, they'll live until they're 100, but if you're poor or middle class, screw you. He also talked about how he's spoken to Trump behind closed doors and talked about how Trump and him disagree on a lot of issues. But number one, at least Trump will hear him out. Kamala Harris refused to even meet with RFK, which doesn't surprise me. They wouldn't even give him Secret Service protection, which is a disgrace by our government. We don't want to legitimize this guy. They couldn't even send the D-list team who was protecting Trump at his rally in Pennsylvania. And they keep telling us that Donald Trump is just going to surround himself completely with people who agree with him. Do you think Kamala Harris welcomes views that are different from hers? Seems like more and more every day I just see sycophants who just support Kamala Harris. I mean, have you seen some of these DNC speeches and the crowd reacting? It makes me want to throw up. These people aren't here to solve your problems. But go ahead, just be clapping seals, vote blue no matter who, just have blind hatred towards Trump. Or if you're a Trump supporter, just think that Trump has never done anything wrong and he's God's gift to the world. And at the end of the day, both the Republican and Democratic establishments will let the rest of us suffer. And the question is, will Trump actually try to do something about this? I know my answer with Kamala Harris. She ain't gonna do a damn thing about it. So that's the choice you're left in this election. Do you want a wild card in Donald Trump, or do you think things are going just fine? In that case, just vote for Kamala Harris, I guess.